Welcome back. Tomorrow, Africans around the globe will celebrate Africa Day. The day commemorates the founding of the first Union of African countries in 1963. Joining us to discuss the significance of the day and how far we've come is Professor Adeoye Akinola, who's from the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. In 2025, what would you say the significance of Africa Day is?
Thank you so much. And generally speaking, it reminds one of the decolonization movements which started even before the 1960s, but it culminated in the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, which was later transmuted into the African Union. It is actually a point in time when Africa has to reconsider their place within the global system, and also to reconsider how far they have gone, even from from slavery to imperialism to colonialism, and even in this current maybe framework of neocolonialism. But as far as Africans wants to remember those years, but when they look forward, it doesn't look as if they are optimistic about their place in the current geopolitical and also social landscape in the world and even in the continent, because Africa has fallen back. They have actually regressed in terms of attaining the dreams of the Pan-African figures who also established the Organization of African Unity.
And I'd like for you, Prof, to just elaborate on that regression as well. You know, the 1960s marked a time, as you're mentioning, lots of independence throughout the continent, decolonization as well. So the vision for Africa come 2025, assuming, was obviously different to what we see today. Just elaborate a little bit on that regression as well, and where Africa should be considering that decolonization that took place in the 1960s.
Thank you so much. It looks as if the African continental elite did not have any plan beyond the colonization project. After they got independence, it was as if they were lost on how to move the continent forward. Many of the immediate post-independence political elites had some ideas, but many of them did not stay in power for so long. Military regimes swept across African society. We have so many unconstitutional tenure elongation, seat-titism that has tried to curtail the moderate achievements of those post-colonial independent leaders. But where are we today? Most of the African society today are actually outside the democratic space. Many of the countries have regressed democratically. Many now are under military regime in the 21st century. In the Sahel region, most of the countries in the Sahel have been overrun by military government. In terms of economic performance, Africa has unexpectedly regressed drastically. Currently, we have wars sweeping across many African societies in Sudan, South Sudan, Congo DRC. In 2024, more than 35 million people were internally displaced due to violent conflict. More than 600 million Africans still lack reliable access to electricity today. More than 48% of people in sub-Saharan Africa are still living below the poverty line. These are not really times to celebrate. It's really a sober reflection for Africans to compare where we ought to be to where we are today, despite the enormous human and natural minerals, critical resources that Africa actually have.
And Prof. Akinola, as you're speaking about also this regression as well, what role did the AU have to play, and what role are they not fulfilling in getting Africa less reliable on former superpowers?
Of course, we know that based on their mandate, the African Union should be upholding democratic governance and human rights across the continent, promoting peace and security, ensuring economic integration and development. They also need to act as that potent voice of Africa in international forums, even including the G20, the UNO, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank. They also protect the interests of continental Africa and even the interests of African in the diaspora. But what we have seen is that we can begin to now interrogate to the extent to which they have actually successfully performed these responsibilities. Of course, I know that the African Union have tried to put in place many protocols. They have also adopted Agenda 2063. They've also established the African Continental Free Trade Area, which are positives in terms of what they could bring on the table. But the continental body should look inward and begin to rethink their peace and security architecture. They are exceedingly too slow to react to conflict situation. Took almost 2 years to stop the bloodletting in Ethiopia or between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray. Then the implementation of their policies, most of the time beautiful policies, fantastic protocols, common positions, but to implement some of those things have been shortcoming. What about all these military coups sweeping through the Sahel? Sometimes they react to military coups, but they lack effective strategies to counter misgovernance because of this comradeship. They tend to protect one another in office. African Union should be thinking of moving beyond this intergovernmentalism to a supranational organization for their optimum performance, unless they are actually an institution with binding authority, they will struggle to perform.
You know, just today as well, we saw reports of several organizations, activists, academics, and community members who took to the streets in Johannesburg and marched to the Constitutional Hill to mark Africa Day for tomorrow. But one of their calls was that they're urging African leaders to stop groveling to Western powers. And earlier you spoke about Africa having to reconsider its place in the world, considering our geopolitical climate right now. How does Africa and African leaders, how do they stop going with a groveling bowl? How do they reassert and reconsider its place in the world when we are currently in this geopolitical climate that we find ourselves in? Of course, on the backdrop of the South Africa meeting with the United States as well this week, and we saw how that went as well.
Thank you. We've had to meet with some actors outside Africa. And one thing I can tell you is that many of them do not take Africans seriously. And we don't even take ourselves seriously, because if we take ourselves seriously, there won't be Congo DRC in war in Tatars. We won't have the case of Sudan, where we don't even know where to start mediating. We won't have Somaliland and Somalia still conflicting. But what I can say is this: if you note the climate in the world, there's this scrambling for Africa now. And it's not just because they love Africa, it's because of the critical resources that Africa has currently. And also, apart from that, there's this gap within the global, the international system. The system itself is craving for leaders. I know Africa might not be that leader, but it is a time for them to be able to reconsider their agency within the global system. Now Africa itself, or the African Union, is a member of the G20. Currently, South Africa is the presidency of G20, holding the summit here in South Africa. This is the time for Africa to leverage their positions, but unfortunately, 54, 55 of them will still travel to Saudi Arabia to go and host an Africa-Saudi summit. This is a pity. This is ridiculous. And despite the fact that there have been concerted calls by the academics, the think tank society, for our leader to actually begin to demonstrate their station in the global system, they still act as paupers, as someone begging for peanuts, for resources, for something that will be falling off the table of global powers. That's not where Africa should be. Africa should be making a concerted effort to be among the big players within the international system. Of course, they have the biggest economic bloc in the world today, talking about after. They should be leveraging on such.
Yeah, and the examples that you give now as well, Prof. Akinola, makes mention to what you've just said now, which is quite interesting about many people or leaders as well globally don't take Africans seriously. What should African leaders be doing to be taken seriously?
Thank you so much. First of all, we have to be united on many things. It doesn't have to be on everything. We are bounded by the same common problem of poverty, of unemployment, of being the victim of climate change. So Africa should come together to be able to have many common positions, not just common position on reform of the international system. There should be common positions on climate. There should be common position of exploring resources in Africa. There should be common position on doing business in Africa. Otherwise, how can a country like Togo negotiate with a country like China or a country like United States? So the African Union should step into the gap and begin somehow to negotiate on behalf of some of these small states, because African resources are actually fast depleting because of the activities of global power. So that's why I'm saying we have to look in what trade among ourselves first, promote this people to people integration, and begin to remove this extreme nationalism, ethnic and identity politics that tend to regress, to redress the boundary achievement that African leaders are making. And they should stop living in Europe. African leaders should live in Africa. Many of our presidents don't even live in Africa, as some of them live abroad. And we have a country in Africa that maybe almost 9 of their leaders are beyond the age of 75. We shouldn't be saying that in a country with growing numbers of the youth in terms of population.
Prof. Akinola, thank you so much for that frank analysis. Really appreciate your time this evening.